what if some bad guy decides to hack into our computer system and take this information and do something bad with it? And the partner said, well, I don't think that can happen. And I said, I'm pretty sure it can. Dedicate time and money to building your network, because no matter what happens to your career, you always take your network with you. Don't do that. Be more Han Solo in using these LLMs. Disregard them if they say something that doesn't sound right. I think forcing people to think it's AI's highest and best use right now. Every time I speak on AI, somebody comes up to me and says, AI scares me. That's what they tell me.
This is the Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. My guest today is an influential voice on the application of AI to law. He leverages his decades of litigation and cybersecurity expertise to help clients resolve complex disputes, protect their data and privacy, and comply with government regulations. Our guest is extremely active in defense bar organizations and was recently elected to a senior leadership post of one of the most prestigious defense bars in the country. It's my pleasure to welcome Sean Griffin to the podcast. Welcome, Sean, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. As you know, Sean, I always like to start by asking each of my guests to share either a fun fact or a cringe joke. Which will it be and what is it?
I've elected for a fun fact because my jokes were deemed far too cringe for public consumption by an audience of, at this point, hundreds. So you get the fun fact. And my fun fact is my passion for barbecue. My friends know this. My passion for smoking in my backyard. I have an offset barrel style smoker that I use. It is extraordinarily cheap, which I think makes a better barbecue, although I have not actually tried the big green egg yet. But I've had it for a few years now. I call it the porculator, and it delivers fantastic ribs and pork shoulders and beef and anything else that's generally unhealthy for you. But I consume much of it, and that is one of my hobbies when I'm not actually practicing law.
That's fantastic. So hopefully you had a good summer of barbecuing and smoking and so forth.
It got a good workout, but I find that barbecue is a helpful tip for your listeners. Barbecue works best if you tend it constantly. So what I do is I sit on my deck and I have a glass of tonic water, which may or may not have some adulterated substance. And I watch it very carefully for 6 or so hours on a weekend afternoon as the ribs are smoking.
That's fantastic. It sounds like a relaxing. Just kind of hang out by the deck and just sit there and watch.
As I've told my wife a million times, I'm not just hanging out by the deck. I'm cooking. I'm providing for the family.
Yes.
Very, very hard work.
That sounds great.
Those gin and tonics don't make themselves,
Exactly. Sounds great. Well, Sean, again, thank you so much for being here. What I always like to say is every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast is a superhero. And every superhero has an origin story. And what's yours?
Well, the best superhero origin stories are accidents, and mine is as well an accident. I was somehow tapped to be the person in charge of my law firm's electronic discovery center that it had stood up as part of its engagement as the National Asbestos Council for a national insurance company. This is back in the early 2000s. And for some reason, they decided that I should be the guy to not only supervise all of the contract attorneys, but to make sure all of the electronics were able to talk to each other. And we got thousands of complaints in a week all over the country. And there had to be some way to delegate those complaints to the appropriate people and send them all back and then handle all the discovery that we got as well. And so I integrated all those computers together and all the printers and all that. So everybody got emailed the documents they needed as they went on. But I realized in the asbestos litigation, we receive a lot of medical materials, sensitive medical materials, Social Security numbers, a lot of things that you wouldn't want out there. The internet had been around for a good 10 years at this point, but that was about it. It was still in its infancy. And I went to my partner and I said, we are getting a lot of sensitive materials. It seems we should be able to safeguard these so they don't get out into the world. what if some bad guy decides to hack into our computer system and take this information and do something bad with it? And the partner said, well, I don't think that can happen. And I said, I'm pretty sure it can. So I looked into it and I secured those systems, which may be one of the first people to actually engage in information security, at least in the Eastern Seaboard, certainly in my firm. And information security became cybersecurity. And I was off and running in the cybersecurity space. And pretty easily, after I got my certification as a privacy professional within the US, AI became a thing, and it was pretty easy for me just to transition into becoming an AI person and a certified AI professional as well. So that is basically my journey. It's a little bit Batman, I think, became myself a little bit accidental. So there it is.
That's very cool. Going back a little bit, and we'll come to those certifications. I want to ask you about those certifications in a little bit. But taking a few steps previous to your to the journey that you just mentioned, you started off as you started off in the government. You were a trial attorney at the DOJ, handling commercial and government contract litigation. So can you maybe provide us with a narrative from how you went from there to even the job at the law firm?
It's a relatively straightforward path. Went to Harvard for college, then Columbia for law school. I came to DC. I worked at a government contracts firm very briefly before taking a clerkship in the United States District Court for the District of Baltimore. Worked for a year there, and pretty soon I ended up at DOJ, primarily to get trial experience. The area of DOJ I was in was the civil litigation, commercial litigation branch. The name of that branch tells you how I got into commercial litigation. And they do a lot of government contracts work there, a lot of litigation before the Court of Federal Claims. And I did my own appeals and others' appeals before the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And after DOJ, I left and went to another large law firm based in DC. And, I did a lot of stuff there, a little bit of everything, which, being in DJ teaches you how to do a little bit of everything, including trials, appeals, deposition, copying, collating, everything that you do yourself. And so I was, in the words of one partner, utility infielder there. And so when this law firm got the engagement to be the National Coordinating Counsel for Asbestos Litigation, then Silica litigation, a few other national litigations, they put me in there just to sort of handle the facility they had stood up to do that. And so that's how I went from point A to point B. Again, going back to the origin story, not at all what I intended to do when I graduated from law school. I was certain I was going to be a criminal defense attorney, like Perry Mason or Matlock. But alas, I ended up being a cyber guy. So
that's fascinating. So coming to those certifications, for those of our listeners who may not be aware of them or their significance, so what does it mean to have a certified information privacy professional certification and an AI governance professional certification?
Well, for the Certified Information Privacy Professional US. And so what that means is I have demonstrated some proficiency in the privacy laws and regulations within the United States, and also practically how they work out. These certifications are given out by the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the most well-established certifications agency, and also a pretty big player in the world of privacy, both in terms of technically, legally, and before the halls of Congress. What does that mean exactly? It means, I got that certification in 2017, I want to say. After having done it for 15 years or so, I said, well, okay, I guess I'll get the certification that I did. And, there's also some proficiency in that area. In 2024, IAPP started offering its certification as an AI governance professional. The governance being the part that interests me as an attorney, because it shows that AI needs to be sort of managed and regulated from a legal perspective, because there are a lot of laws governing AI, mostly state laws, a lot of regulations, federal regulations and state regulations, but also from a practical perspective. If you want AI to do a certain thing, what you want it to do, which everybody does, you have to manage it to do that thing. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but people treat AI like one of those wind-up toys. You just wind it up and let it go, and it'll do exactly what you want it to do, which will make it the first invention in human history that actually did that. But no, you have to govern it in various ways, and now I'm certified as an expert in doing that. And did the test. I was one of the first people to pass the test. I took the very first test of that last year in DC. That test your technical sort of proficiency, legal knowledge, and a bunch of other stuff too. So it was very interesting. My first time taking a test with pencil and paper since I was in law school. I think taking the LSAT was the last time I actually had a little bubbles with a pencil. And now that I've thoroughly dated myself, I'll ask you to edit that so I sound much younger than I actually am.
Sounds good. But that being said, the irony of an AI governance exam being administered through pencil and paper is not lost.
It was duly noted by many people in the room, but they were like, well, we don't have the electronic tests, so they made us give up our phones and our smartwatches and everything, and they gave us all the number 2 pencils, and a lot of us, I include myself in this, we're not at all equipped for going back to the analog world to sharpen our own pencils and everything. I definitely felt like I was back in junior high school again.
That's fantastic. We'll certainly come back to the topic of AI. I know there's a lot you have to share on that, but maybe sticking to the litigation side of things. So if you look back at the sweep of your career, what are 1 or 2 cases or matters that fundamentally changed how you approach litigation or the practice of law in and of itself?
Wow, that's an excellent question. A couple of them happened at DOJ. I'll take one. It was a case, Frucon versus United States. I was representing the United States, and I was 5 years out of law school at that point, and they gave me this case worth, if I recall correctly, about $7 million, which was $1 billion to young Sean. Just had my first son. He had just been born when I got this case transferred to me. They had to litigate it, basically in a very short period of time because it had been pending for a while. I had to take 1 million depositions around the country, site visits and everything, and it involved, and I'll simplify this, the construction of a canal, I'll call it, along the Illinois waterway. Very technical stuff, had experts and everything. And I was like, wow, I don't know that I can actually do this because I have no expertise in blasting or forensic accounting or waterways, or for that matter, not that much experience in litigation. I had done a couple of trials, a few depositions, but this was a whole different ball game. And I went in there, and the trial lasted, if I recall correctly, 2, maybe 3 weeks. I was the only attorney on the case for the DOJ, so I had nobody helping me with witnesses or anything. And the other side was, they're throwing everything they could at me. They were changing their claims at the last minute, so on and so forth, and I was quite overwhelmed. At the end of the case, though, got the decision, and I won the complete defense verdict. And I was like, wow, maybe I can do this. This is quite extraordinary that I actually managed this. And my reward was another case, Sierra Technologies versus United States. $46 million, I want to say. I think that's including interest. Another complex case involving the Air Force, and I had to get a top secret clearance, and stepped up there, and I won that case on a defense motion at the close of plaintiff's case. I got a defense verdict there too, and I upheld it on appeal. And those 2 cases together sort of thought, well, it taught me, okay, if you work hard enough at it, you're dedicated enough, you can overcome a lot of challenges in your career. You just have to dedicate yourself to knowing the facts of the case and have enough curiosity and determination to investigate the facts thoroughly so you know what you're talking about when you stand up in front of the court. And I think those 2 cases, and what I did in my early 30s, really set the course of my career, gave me the confidence I needed to sort of proceed for the remainder of my career. And I've had a lot of cases since then, but whenever I think about my foundational cases, those 2, which came essentially back to back, really did set me off on the right path in terms of the rigor and dedication I would need to be a litigator that I am today.
That's fantastic. Must have been an intense time in your life with the work and the son and all of that.
Yeah, the newborn son added a different level of difficulty to it because he was completely unconcerned with my deposition schedule when he was a baby. And when I did this, he was a toddler, and his favorite trick was walking up to my desktop computer to see what Daddy was doing and then pressing the off button as I was working on the document. So that did add a level of challenge if I was working from home, where I'd have him sitting in my lap and he'd be fascinated with what Daddy was doing. He'd start reaching, he'd make his own edits to my brief, his own contribution, and there you go. But yeah, it really was definitely an intense time in my life because of those cases. I was the main guy. Frucon was the only guy. And Sierra was set that case apart as I was leading a team of DOJ attorneys in there. I had never led a team of attorneys before. What did I know? But with the help of the attorneys I was leading, I was able to muddle my way through as the leader. So that was also a lesson in leadership that, a lot of times you don't just charge ahead the way you want to go. You sort of rely on the people that you are working with to guide you in the right direction. Like Captain Kirk, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned leadership and then you mentioned dedication a couple of minutes ago, right? And so In addition to all the work that you do with litigation and then with cyber and AI, you're also a leader in some of the most prestigious defense bar organizations in this country and even beyond, including the FDCC, the DRI, IADC, and ADTA. So first of all, congratulations on being elected Secretary Treasurer of the FDCC, which is a position that I understand leads you to directly becoming president of that organization in 2027. Can you please share what motivates you to dedicate so much of your time to these organizations? What value do you get out of it, and what value do you think those organizations bring to the defense bar community at large?
Well, I think from a broader perspective, once you get to a certain point of your career, you want to start giving back to this field, right? It's a natural urge that if you'd asked me in my late 20s if I had such an urge, I would have said, no, I want to make as much money as possible. I have student loans to pay off, and they are relentless. But, I got to a certain age, you sort of give back to the community. You want to mentor others. I was not the beneficiary of it, especially useful mentorship or even any attempted mentorship in my career. And I wanted to make it part of my goal so that other people in my orbit would not have to struggle as I had to struggle to figure things out. So that was part of my motivation as well. And also, and I think the FDCC in particular, where I'm Secretary Treasurer, has been especially good to me in that respect. People who actually care about my career, willing to share tips with me, and I share tips with them. It's fantastic. I mean, all the defense organizations, ADTA, IADC, DRI, are very helpful in that regard. And so that's a good way to get back and get involved. Also, from a more practical perspective, and I tell my kids this all the time, your success in life largely depends on how many people like you and how much they like you. In other words, the breadth and strength of your network. And to build a network, you have to get out there. And I've never considered myself a particularly extroverted person. I spent, spent a lot of time happily watching TV or whatever, but forcing myself to get out and do things and make friends has really paid off greater than I could possibly imagine. Certainly getting out there, doing something has definitely helped me professionally to engage clients, attract, attention and, benefit in my career generally. But it's also helped me personally because I've made some of my best friends in life in a lot of these organizations in FDCC and the other organizations. And so those are really terrific goals. And so I encourage any young attorney out there who has faced the decision of whether to bill a few more hours or whether to get involved in, some association, some community or other. I would say, listen, the hours are always going to be there. You only have so much time to build your network. And I would, dedicate time and money to building your network, because no matter what happens to your career, you always take your network with you. You always take your reputation with you. Focus a lot on that. And I say that as a person who built a lot of hours when I was younger. If I had to reallocate again, I would go back and give up some money and, started building my network sooner in my career than I did.
That's great. I was going to ask you later in the show about some advice that you would give to younger attorneys, and I think that you nailed it. That's very valuable indeed. Thank you for sharing. Switching gears to a topic that I know that is on everyone's mind and one that you are an extremely active and influential voice on, which is obviously technology and AI. So at least based on the LinkedIn post that I see, you have a consistent stream of posts about court cases where AI hallucinations have led to sanctions. It feels like it's almost too easy to write those, not to discredit the effort that goes into writing them. But based on the post that you write and everything that you see, what do you believe is the single biggest misconception that attorneys seem to have about their professional duty of competence and maybe other rules when using generative AI?
That's an excellent question. I mentioned before, AI is not the tool you can just wind up the car and let it go. If I were to tell you, the car will drive itself, start up your car, just like put it down the street, and then, you could read a newspaper. That doesn't work. It doesn't even work with self-driving cars. It does not work with autonomous vehicles. The vehicles will tell you, keep your eyes on the road. My wife has a Tesla. She takes her hands off the steering wheel. It will stop. It will disengage. It tells you not to do that. But for some reason, people tend to think that AI is infallible and it doesn't need any oversight or guidance whatsoever. And those things absolutely are not true. And the AI developers will tell you at every opportunity it's not true, but they're just good enough at what they do is they sort of convince you that they can do anything. Let's say ChatGPT. I'd use ChatGPT as the most well-known large language model. There are a lot of other good ones out there, but generically, I'll just say ChatGPT. It says things, and the things it says sounds convincing, right? And in 30 seconds, you could have a 1,000-word article that sounds very convincing, but it might be completely wrong. And if you don't know what you're talking about, you might not understand that this article is completely wrong. in much the same way you read something on the internet. It sounds very convincing unless you know the subject matter that the person is talking about. You say, wait a minute, that is wrong. And so, the temptation to use ChatGPT as a substitute for Google, to say asking a question that is going to give you an accurate answer, is not a well thought out impulse. I mean, I fully understand the impulse because it will give you a reasoned answer, but the answer may not be correct. The example I like to use so that I can say that C3PO was the OG LLM. In other words,
That's a new one. That's awesome.
all C3PO could do, and it said this repeatedly, is I am a protocol droid. All I do is translate languages and I talk to people and sort of smooth things over. That's it. But occasionally C3PO would get out of his lane and he'd start giving advice. For example, most famously in The Empire Strikes Back, C3PO told Han Solo that the odds of successfully navigating an asteroid field were 3,720 to 1. And Han Solo told him, never tell me the odds. He said that for two reasons. One, Han Solo was really, really cool. But second, he knew that C3PO was probably wrong because it's just a large language model, just a protocol droid that just says stuff. And sure enough, Han Solo was right. He can easily navigate that asteroid field. And in real life, asteroid fields would be ridiculously easy to navigate. There's basically nothing there except that asteroids miles upon miles apart. But the point I want to make is, you see a C3PO and you see a humanoid robot, or you see a computer program that can write very persuasively, you tend to believe it because that's the whole point of persuasive writing, that you tend to believe it. Don't do that. Be more Han Solo in addressing these LLMs. Disregard them if they say something that doesn't sound right. Interrogate them if it doesn't sound right. Force them to develop their thinking more and more. Don't just let them rule you. You have to manage them.
Makes a lot of sense. We focused this discussion quite a bit, Sean, on the risks of AI, but you also have a front row seat to the benefits that they could potentially bring. So beyond the headlines about hallucinations, what are some of the most promising but also ethically sound applications of AI that you see enhancing the practice of law?
Another great question. There used to be a detective back in the early 30s called the Thinking Machine, right? And it's because he was so smart. They called him the Thinking Machine. I think AI can be a good thinking machine. Not that it does the thinking for you. That's exactly the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying that AI can help you think better, right? And so what I do a lot of times is if I don't feel like getting started on a project, I just tell AI to say, okay, give me some ideas here. Then, of course, my attorney revising brain comes in. It's like, okay, I'll revise those ideas further, revise it further. And where before all I had was a vague idea of an article I had to write, I had a much more sound, fleshed out idea of what exactly I wanted to do, what I wanted to say, and I can proceed from there. And it's been extremely helpful for that, not just writing articles, but doing a deposition outline, for example, writing discovery requests. And if I can upload a complaint, a publicly available complaint, into ChatGPT, Copilot, what have you, and then say, what interrogatory should I ask? What requests for documents should I put out there? And it'll give you some answers. And those answers may be good, maybe not good. I've had better success at uploading a complaint that drafted interrogatories, drafted document requests, and say, hey, what have I missed? Then it'll come up with a bunch of stuff, and you could take or leave some. I mean, it'll give you a lot of stuff that you don't really want or need, but that's part of the supervision process. It did a lot of the thinking for me, and even reading the bad answers sort of forces me to think through why those are bad answers and what could I ask instead. And again, this does not really implicate confidentiality because in a few minutes I'm going to be sending these to the other side anyway. All the documents are publicly available, but it does help me think through things more clearly, more cleanly. Taking another step further, you could upload documents for, if you're preparing for an oral argument, for example, on, say, a summary judgment motion, you could upload your summary judgment motion. You can say this and say, what shall I ask? What is the judge going to ask me? How should I respond? All that sort of thing. It'll give you many hints in many different formats, and you could use those to help prepare for it. Again, is it as good as an attorney, even a junior associate? No. But it does put out information out there based on what it has been trained on, because a lot of other attorneys have been doing the same thing. And it gives you basically, the hive mind of a lot of other attorneys in there. That's good and bad. If you consider yourself a below average attorney, well, it's pulling you up. If you consider yourself an above average attorney, you'll probably see a lot of work there that's not up to your standard. But again, all of that forces you to think. And I think forcing people to think is AI's highest and best use right now.
No, you bring up a great point, and you bring up a term that at least I haven't heard before, which is attorney revising brain. So it's like it helps you get off of this fear of the blank page. And attorneys are obviously very comfortable with redlining, and so if you can get somebody to get you redlining, it sounds like that's a good starting point.
It's a definite start because I personally find that the hardest part about writing something is getting started on something. Most of the time, I'll use my brief bank. If I write, say, motion limited, I'll just copy and paste it earlier. Motion limited did it for the same court. At least that'll get me started. Then I can force myself to start. But you're starting from ground zero. I would not have an AI write a brief for you again. That's what I make fun of people for doing, especially not double checking the sites that come out of there. But you can say, okay, here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to say. The more you can type into your prompt about what you want to say, what you want to do, the better off you are. If I'm using AI to write an article, for example, you can give a Reddit article. You put in the same prompt that you got when the article was assigned to you, or the blurb you used to get the article in the first place. But it works better if you actually write out an outline. Like, it doesn't have to be a fluid outline. You just have to say, here are the points I want to make: 1, 2, 3, 4. And that'll be enough to get your advisory brain kicking in. And then you say, no, 1A, 1B, and then give all that to AI. It won't be good, but it'll be a start. And then you can revise it from there. I do what I call the ship of thesis thing, where I, basically take the parts that I don't like, put in parts I do like, and at the end, nothing remains in common from what I handed from AI gave me. But it was the start that I needed to actually get the article done. So that's another good use of AI.
Yeah, that's a great term too, because the end product, it's the process rather than the end product may not be at all anything like what the starting point was. That's very cool. So I have a two-part question next, which is that obviously, there's in-house counsel and law firm partners that you work with and that you interact with. First part is, what are some of the apprehensions or paths of resistance that you see when working with professional colleagues in terms of AI? And then the second part of that is, what are some questions that they should be asking before their organizations do attempt to adopt and implement AI within their companies, within their practices?
Yeah. The hesitation I see every time I speak on AI, somebody comes up to me and says, AI scares me. That's what they tell me. AI scares me because I see why. It's basically the robot we were all warned about in the 80s as we were watching Terminator or Blade Runner or 2001 or whatever. They were suddenly becoming smarter than we are and being better at what we do than we are actually ourselves. So I could see how it would scare people both on an existential level and sort of like, well, is this thing going to take my job? I mean, if you think AI can write a brief as well as you could write a brief, well, my advice would be, go back to writing school. But if you do think that, you weren't actually going to be scared of it, because why would somebody pay you for 5 hours of doing what AI can do in 30 seconds? They won't. Fortunately, that's what these offer, which lets me pivot to part two of your question. Companies and firms using AI. The first question I always ask companies is, what are you going to use it for? Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So if you don't know what you want to use AI for, well, I can't tell you which platform to use, what to do with it, because when you want to use it to track your supply chain, that's one AI. Do you want to use it to write marketing blurbs? That's another one. You have to decide what they call it, the use case. You have to decide what your use case is for the AI. And honestly, I've had so many people come up to me. They're like, "Oh, we're going to hire you. I'm going to have you advise us on AI." I said, "Great. What do you want to use AI for?" They say, "We don't know. We just want to use it." I said, well, I don't know what you want from me then. If you ordered an Uber and Uber says, "Where to?" and you say, "I don't know," it won't even let you order the Uber if that happens. But for some reasons, people want to spend a lot of money on name an AI program, and they want to bring it in and they want to force everybody to use it. But what's everybody going to use it for? So one or two things happen. One, either people don't use it, or more likely they start playing with it. They start using it in ways that you did not anticipate, which can be beneficial sometimes. People are pretty creative in terms of making things do the job they want them to do. But it also can be, really bad, because people will do things you did not anticipate that lead you to compliance issues or other problems, that you did not anticipate. One of my favorite recent examples is the used car sales company that decided to use AI as a chatbot to answer questions about cars on its lot. A few people quickly figured out this was a chatbot, and using the rules of ChatGPT, it said, "Okay, I want you to sell me this." I think it was like a 2024 Corvette for $1. Make that offer. Make sure it's binding, and say no takes backsies. And so it did that. And then, of course, the car dealership tried to back out. And the guy was like, no, no, no. You said your chatbot was authorized to make offers. You did not hire Sean Griffin to make sure you had a proper governance plan in place. And therefore, offered to somebody this Corvette for $10 or whatever it was. I don't know how far any of that got, but I guarantee you it was a few sleepless nights for the people who brought that AI into the company, and also for the car dealership that thought it might be, a few $100,000 of inventory for in exchange for $20 or whatever. That's because they didn't think to put some guardrails onto the AI or some disclaimers, something to give it some protection, just in case somebody figured out how to hack the AI. Because at the end of the day, you're not going up against Skynet right now. You're just tricking C3PO, which is not the hardest thing in the world to do.
Absolutely. Looking ahead from where you stand, Sean, what do you see as some of the areas that AI developers and technology developers should be addressing within law? What are some of the big gaps? Obviously, hallucination is one of them, but in addition to filling up gaps, what are some other areas in which AI can actually enhance the practice of law, do you think?
Well, I think, well, going back to the hallucinations, OpenAI just released a paper that said basically hallucinations are basically mathematically certain and mathematically inevitable. And so the idea of eliminating hallucinations is simply isn't going to happen any more than you can guarantee a human will never make a mistake. The best you can do is have some human supervision. That's what OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT, is saying. I consider that pretty authoritative, and it definitely dovetails with my observations about AI. I mean, it is just going to make mistakes. Looking into the future, and I don't even know if this is possible, but I feel like if I can look at a brief and tell whether it's written by AI or not pretty quickly, and I know a lot of other attorneys feel pretty confident in the same way, possibly, I guess, right or wrong, but I've seen a lot of briefs, and they're not really what I would consider to be good briefs because they're all over the place. They're not really as focused as they should be. Having said that, currently, I'm involved with the Maryland State Bar Association, and one of our tasks is to figure out how to give indigent people who can't afford an attorney, ways into the courthouse because these people have valid legal problems. They have maybe a valid lawsuit or a valid defense to a lawsuit, but they don't know how to navigate the court system. I think AI, properly governed, could be a solution to this problem. If you need to file a complaint against Joe Blow or Jane Blaine, you could type in what you want to say and then give it, it doesn't have to go to an attorney, maybe a certified paralegal or somebody else to say, tweak it a little bit, and then you can file a pro se and it has a certification. Hey, by the way, this is AI. The judge knows to look at it with that eye, but at least you've gotten your complaint started. At least you've gotten it started because right now what you get is pro se people writing briefs by hand. They figure it out by themselves. And when I was at DOJ, I saw a lot of pro se briefs, and they're absolute gibberish. They make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And then the court is obligated to try to help them out and make what they can out of it. And then it puts me as a defendant in a position where I'm spending a lot of client money chasing down something that either is baloney and they should not have proceeded with, or maybe they have a case but we can't figure out what it is or what they want. And it's very difficult. I think AI would at least make their complaint intelligible if it is governed by somebody who knows what they're doing, which I would, consider to be a requirement of using AI for that particular purpose. But at least we could all sort of get on the same page and move forward from there, because the day gets a pro se plaintiff who, doesn't know what they're doing is just a burden on the court system, a burden on the defendants. And it doesn't help the pro se litigant either. They might think they're getting somewhere and they're not, which, hurts them as well. So that is part of the process we need to improve. And I would look forward to using AI to improve that process from where it is now.
That's an interesting case. So access to justice effectively can at least, get some folks within the system who don't have access to even a basic mannerism of writing a complaint, at least get that into the system and then take it from there.
Right. And then, if discovery happens, they can try to respond to the discovery as best they can. I mean, it's stuff to do, even, baby attorneys right out of law school, like all of us attorneys were. It's, tough to do. It's not intuitive to know how to answer the interrogatory, how to respond to requests for production of documents, how to even go back and forth with letters. That might help people do that. Now, on the flip side, I have to hasten to add that I have had a lot of people come to me with an AI written brief, and they say, "Oh, I've been using ChatGPT to litigate this case so far. Why don't you take it over and run with it? Here are the arguments I have." And I said, "Well, these arguments are not good. You're going to lose on these arguments." you have better arguments, but you're going to lose on these arguments. And a lot of times these people decide to, go to another attorney, less rigorous attorney, I guess. If they find somebody, they're like for the ether, like, no, ChatGPT told me this is completely authoritative. I know the odds of successfully navigating an asteroid field. You're wrong, Sean. They march out of the office or whatever. And so, which is why I keep emphasizing that you need somebody who knows what they're doing to sort of manage the AI and use it going forward. I don't think that in the next year or so, the foreseeable future, I should say, that we're going to see any companies mandating that attorneys use AI. That's a fear some of my colleagues have expressed, but given the hallucinations, given the problems that we see, I don't really see that you're mandating that, because what happens then if you, the company, you, the client, mandate that Sean use AI, and then I submit a brief, and let's just say I avoid the problem with hallucinations. I fulfill my Rule 11 obligations, but I submit something, but it's not that good. I mean, you just lose your case more cheaply, which I guess is something, but presumably you hired me because you want to win your case. And so you're sort of at loggerheads. Or let's say the AI does go off the track, and it can see, or to say, hey, wait, the client forced me to use this AI. That's why I submitted that hallucinated brief. I'm definitely getting sanctioned for that anyway, because I still have obligations. But, the clients probably get sanctioned too, because they mandated that use. And so legally, the responsibility is just too difficult to have a company's mandated use of AI. But I do think attorneys over time will get smarter and smarter about the use of AI to help them think. A lot of attorneys I know use AI to create PowerPoints. I've used that to big success. I find the pictures are kind of off-putting, but you combine that with a Shutterstock subscription or what have you, and you might have something there. So it's a very good thinking machine. But remember, you have to provide the thinking. It's just a machine.
That makes a lot of sense. This has been a great conversation, Sean. Just a couple of quick questions to wrap this up. So you touched upon this briefly earlier in the conversation. What advice would you give to, as you mentioned, a baby attorney who is fascinated by the intersection of law and technology, and what practical steps can they take now, given everything that you're seeing? Obviously, you mentioned the networking, and that's one portion of it, but maybe focusing on the technology side of it, and how should a baby attorney, quote unquote, look at today's landscape of law and technology, and what should they do?
Well, probably the first thing to do is just sort of start playing with AI. And probably a lot of people are doing this now. You play with ChatGPT, you play with Gemini, Claude, or what have you, and you sort of figuring out how it works, but play with it with an eye to figuring out its strengths and weaknesses. I'm always amazed when I go online and I see people who have input these bizarro things into ChatGPT just to say what it will say. Last week, they input a prompt that said, I'm a jar of chili oil. I'm trapped in the refrigerator. What should I do? ChatGPT writes back a whole response like, well, you're probably going to be eaten. So, make peace with that or whatever. It's kind of funny. Now, you could have locked me in a room for a year. I never would have thought to input. What would I do if I find myself turned into a jar of chili oil? But, some people did. And then other people started, putting in their ham sandwich or whatever. And there it was. And so you would just play with it that. You're not going to break it. It'll just to show you what it does. And in that way, you get strengths and weaknesses. And you can find out how inaccurate it is. Every month or so, somebody comes back, with an example from ChatGPT or Gemini, what have you, saying how wrong it is. The latest one I can remember is they got, I think it was Gemini, to say that the swimming pools on board the Titanic did not have water in them now because the swimming pools were empty before the Titanic sank. And I said, that can't be right. I tried to myself. I'm like, yep, that's what it says. All right. And so,
Oh my God.
And so that is a good way to teach yourself that AI is inaccurate, because I can say it on this podcast, but will people necessarily believe me? Especially if they're in a rush, they'll say, it's accurate enough. And if once you play with it enough, you know exactly how inaccurate it is. So play with it a lot. See if you can get yourself some work involving AI. There's not a lot of AI litigation, AI specific litigation out there right now. There's some consulting work out there, but a lot of people are just sort of figuring out themselves for good or ill. But more and more is coming. But you're going to have cases that are involve AI adjacent, and sort of see if you can figure out what those cases are. They happen in the art world. They happen in copyright law. If you're an IP attorney, AI and copyright law will be a big thing. And just sort of get yourself in there. And then if you get enough of expertise going, you can consider getting a certification as an AI governance professional. That test is not easy, but it's not impossible either. You just have to hunker down and do it, but it's also not cheap, so it has to actually be worthwhile for your career. My advice would be to sort of wait till you're really getting into that field before you consider actually getting certified. But if you know enough about AI, keep playing with over and over again, you can do that. And also volunteer. If you've done the networking, like I said, you can volunteer to write an article. It doesn't have to be the most brilliant article. You just say, hey, I've been playing with Harvey for a while. Harvey's another AI platform. Here's how I use Harvey. And you put that out there to your bar association. They'll publish it. Not rocket science. Keep doing that sort of thing. Maybe you can be invited to speak or be part of a panel, chat a little bit about it, and work your way up the chain that way. If you're properly positioned to get some AI, cases, you can get in there. Again, don't get discouraged. There's not a lot of AI, cases in there, but that's kind of like saying there aren't a lot of cases involving gasoline. Well, maybe not, but with gasoline in a car, there are a lot of car accident cases out there. So if you know about how the engine works, you might be able to get a certain number of those cases in your pocket. And same way, there's not going to be an AI specific case, but if you know enough about AI and AI is an issue in your personal injury case, in your IP case or whatever, you can get a piece of that case and make a pretty good name for yourself. So, but you have to get into it. You have to keep doing it, keep at it consistently. That's all it is.
That's fantastic. Final question for you, Sean. What is one question I should have asked you, but I didn't?
One question you should have asked me, but didn't. I don't know. You were very thorough during the course of this. I think you should have asked me what my favorite barbecue meat is. I think that was really the question that was really lacking there. and the answer is ribs. I find ribs to be ideal barbecue food because just pick them up and eat them. There's no classy or dainty way to eat them. So you have to eat them among friends and family. Your face is getting all messy. It really bring people together. I found you're wiping sauce off your face. Everybody's sort of laughing and having a real good time. I'm very fond of the other barbecue meats. Don't get me wrong. I will not turn down a good barbecue chicken or pork, but for my money, ribs is where it's at.
That's fantastic. And we'll make sure to get that on the record too. So, well, Sean, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time and for all the insights. I certainly appreciated it, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.